All right, so we got our exposures for scale and space. We take a lot of shots. Not all of them are going to work out because it's really hard to tell in your viewfinder what's working and what's not. Let me kind of go through the basic problems we have with them. So first, the first thing we want to be able to do, which we should be able to do no matter what our camera is line up the shot in a way that gives an illusion. So I actually like this shot because it lines it up so that it really does feel like this robot is standing in the quad. Right? That horizon, that lighting, all of that matches. The issue with this shot is it makes it look like it's a portrait of him so that maybe he's the size of a regular student because the background is so blurry. And so it's that kind of classic forced perspective of a portrait. So then the natural thing to try to do is to try to get this same shot but get everything in equal focus. And to do that, you take your aperture and you stop it down. So there's only direct light going into your sensor so you don't get any out of focus light signatures. But in order to do that and get them both in focus, first of all, I had to zoom out. Because when I zoomed in to make him even taller and bigger, that forces the difference in the focal depths even more. And of course, you need to have the object far enough away from your camera lens so that you can get it in the same depth of field as your background. So for my camera, having it within 8 feet or so of the lens forces it into kind of a macro view where either it's in focus, like it is here, but nothing else is in focus. And so when I zoom out, it's very hard to make them match unless I force the aperture really low, and that gives me a less balanced exposure. So you see, in order for there to be enough light to get the exposure without the shutter speed being so long that it would be shaky from me hand holding it, I had to force the ISO up, and you can see how grainy it gets. But sure enough, everything's in focus here. So actually, of those shots, all these experiments, I have to choose what is the most believable kind of manipulation of scale and space. And I actually have to go with this one. It feels like the most resolved photo, and it's playing with scale and space, even though the focus isn't matching like it is here. So that's going to be the first one I choose. So let me make a folder here on my desktop, and I'll call this Scale and Space Raw Exposures. Now this has a lot to do with your lens and the lighting conditions on the day. And ultimately, the best aperture setting I was able to use for my shots was about an f10, which doesn't give me a whole lot in focus for the available light. When I forced it up even to just f16, I got very underexposed shots. Now, some other shots I thought were kind of interesting, playing with scale and space, making this clock tower seem so much bigger by pairing it with the tiny helicopter, right? So it plays with your perceptions a little bit. It looks more like it's the Washington Monument or something instead of just our clock tower. But then I actually like this one. This plays more to the strengths of my camera. And this makes the helicopter look big simply because of its detail and its position in the composition and how it's overlapping something in the far distance and how there's no kind of telltale markers to what its size really is. So I think that's a fairly fun perceptual shift of scale and space. There's just so many different ways we can approach that. So I'm going to put that one into my best raw exposures. Then some of these others, looking at the green, I thought this kind of David and Goliath setup was pretty good. I wish the focus was better. But that setup, and this is the problem with shooting with digital cameras. You know, we look at our viewfinder and we're doing manual focus and we think it looks good. But then when we see it on the computer, the focus doesn't quite match up, and that's true here. But I like the composition and the placement of that. This one has kind of closer match of focus, though again, not very It's not going to fool anybody. It's better to have the background out of focus than the foreground out of focus. But it's just not a very interesting composition. Same thing here. You know, it's lined up correctly with the top of the building. It's nice that it's contrasted on the background, but it's just, the helicopter is just too small. I had to zoom in too much and had it too close to the lens in order to get that good focus. So I think of all these different trials, these would be the three that I work with. And so I want you to go through your exposures. And again, you're lucky if you get one that really kind of works out. But it's really teaching you different ways of trying to control your angle, your proximity, your zoom, and your camera settings to show kind of this illusion of scale and space. Okay, so now I simply take those three, I open them up in Photoshop, and it's how do we use, I might throw this one in there too. How do we use just basic processing to bring these effects out? And remember, the one thing Photoshop cannot do is add focus, right? But it can take away focus. So if I'm looking at this one, and the best focus I have is pretty blurry on this robot, what I can do is make a duplicate of everything, select around the thing that is not in the best focus, softly, and that includes all this brick. I'm just doing this pretty loosely. This is kind of like making an alpha channel, right? And obviously it'd be better to fix these issues in the exposure. But now I'm going to select the inverse because I can't bring that into more focus. So I select everything else, make a duplicate of that. So I basically have a mask. And now I'm just going to take, with Gaussian blur, the focus down a little bit on the background. Maybe even more so than it is in the foreground. If I do it too much more so like that, it actually makes it look like what it really was. So I just have to kind of even out their focus by blurring it just a little bit in the background. So that they feel kind of equal. All right. Then, how can I make the composition stronger? Well, I will merge them all by saying merge visible while holding down Option, so I get that combined all as one frame. And then I can use transform on that, and I can do this kind of cheater's crop, where I'm still, everyone has to keep the same native format of your camera. But that way I can really play with these space manipulations. Make this even a little bit blurrier. I want them to feel like they're treated in the same focus. All right. And there they'll feel more equal to each other. Now, in terms of processing it just in the ordinary way, once you feel like you've maximized your illusion, then you just use adjustment layers. And I will first play with the levels, just optimize that. It's a pretty optimized shot already. See if it helps for it to be a little bit brighter in the midtones. I think it does. It brings out the textures and colors a little bit better. Definitely don't want to brighten it anymore. And then layer a new adjustment layer for the color balance. It was a beautiful day today in terms of how diffuse the lighting was. You can see how the shadows aren't going to give anything away. But I probably want to bring a little bit more warmth to the highlights and just a little bit of coolness to the shadows. And that can help that perception as well. All right, so from this raw exposure, we just try to optimize it as best we can without changing the physical format. This would be my process shot, so I'll call this, well, let's first save it while I'm working on it. So I'll call it Carl Assignment 9, or is this Assignment 8? Assignment 8, I thought so. Okay, yes, Assignment 8, and this is, I'll call it Space. Is it 9? Let me show you how organized I am. I have them all in here. Yes, Assignment 9. Assignment 8. Ridiculous. All right. Yeah. So Assignment 9, Scale and Space, this is going to be first exposure, so I'll just call it 1 as a PSD, and I'll call this processed. But then when I save it as a JPEG to put into PhotoBucket, because this has both the raw exposure on the bottom and then all the processing decisions. For PhotoBucket, I'm simply going to call it Carl Assignment 9. I'll just probably call it Carl Space for scale and space 1B as a JPEG. Copy that, put it onto the desktop, and then show the raw exposure, and I save that as a JPEG, and that's 1A. Keep this little tutorial short and sweet. So we're doing a mini portfolio of 3 scale and space manipulations, and these are the JPEGs that you would put up. The raw exposure, and then the processed exposure that just makes that illusion just a little bit stronger. All right. And then, of course, you're saving your PSD, your working process as you go. Okay, the next one, this plays more to the strengths of my camera and being able to make things that are small look large when shot at the right angle. And so all this really might need, I can optimize the composition a little bit, maybe by scaling it, shifting it over. Like so. Let's see if I like that more. Yeah, it's a little bit more dynamic. Again, it's not exactly cropping because we're still using the